Thank you.
Thanks.
Boy, it's different having an audience out there.
Almost nervous. So.
Of course, we've had the debates. We've been warming up. What they said was try to make this as much like Idaho Reports as possible. What they don't realize is usually we just sit there and say a word and then let Jim follow it up, and we're at the end of the show.
Set me up, right.
So with that, so Rocky, I'm curious, from your point of view, what were the top environmental issues of the 2014 legislative session?
Well, wolves were certainly, again, a big one, because we had the Wolf Control Board, in which it took a little while for the House and the Senate to figure out exactly what they were going to do, and then at the end they kind of punted and came up with another option. Basically, they've put this Wolf Control Board in, they couldn't set up another, under the Constitution, they couldn't set up another state agency, so they put it under the governor's office. And the governor has yet to appoint it, but that was a hot one. Then there was the EPA was a hot issue. There was a huge hearing of a bunch of dredge miners who were complaining about the fact that now they have to get a permit to do that, a permit under an EPA program that the state is trying to get control of. And in fact, I understand that those same miners are planning a protest dredge July 4 up in the Salmon River, and that could or should be as interesting as the Clive and Bundy affair.
No.
An issue that, like so many sessions, that rarely got much, didn't get as much attention because nobody beyond the insiders understands it, is water. And there was really a significant development in water this year. They are going to fund the one issue that everybody heard about was the $15 million that they are going to do, looking at some dam studies and to do some projects, including to buy some water that they could use to help ensure that Mountain Home Air Force Base has water.
Now let's talk about that for a second. How big a deal is this as far as infrastructure projects go?
It's $15 million. We've just finished a hearings this week in the Treasure Valley about raising Arrow Rock Reservoir to provide more flood control. There's the Galloway Dam project that's being looked at, Island Park, and these are all projects that are on the wish list of the water folks. But it's, ironically, and I thought Betsy and Dan dealt with this early in the year. Ironically, for these projects to work, to move forward, they're likely going to need federal funding. So they're going to need the Democrats to take over the Senate and the House, and to stay in the White House, and to approve a huge infrastructure project that basically the many Republicans oppose. So, but we can't do anything if we don't have the studies done. And the way these things work is they sit on the shelf sometimes for years, but when that moment comes, you might be ready. So some of them are fair. Galloway is particularly controversial, but
why?
It's controversial because it would inundate a big chunk of private property in Washington County up north of Weiser, and those are people's land, and they're not going to necessarily like that. And it would also change. It would eliminate a large stretch of the Weiser River. So, and there are cost issues. There are all kinds of other things, but that's the biggest issue of that one.
I think one issue that kind of flew under the radar this session, that's been talked about for years and that happened this year, is taking over primacy on the MPDES wastewater permitting program, the National Pollutant Discharge Elimination System. That passed with pretty much unanimous support in both houses. And it even gave Governor Otter something he could trumpet in a campaign ad now before the primary, where he says he fought EPA, and his example is because of this move to take over primacy. As far as I know, I don't think EPA objects to Idaho taking over primacy. Most states already have done that. Of course, we do know that Governor Otter has fought the EPA in the past and fought them very hard, and it has to do with some alteration of some ponds on his ranch, but that is another story.
Betsy, this isn't the first time, though, that the legislature has talked about taking over primacy, but usually it comes down to an issue of cost. Who's going to pay for all of this? What was the turning point this year that made it all possible? Because they brought it up and it kind of went under the radar then.
It's kind of amazing because the consensus for years has been that we didn't have the money, even if the state only had to pay a third and the permit holders paid a third and the feds paid a third. This year, IACI took up the banner for this and said, we can do it. And there really wasn't any discussion of where the money's coming from. And it sounds like the feds probably aren't going to pay anything, and it may be difficult to collect all that much from the permit holders, a lot of whom are municipalities. The state may end up bearing the full cost of this, but the legislature agreed, and they're moving forward. I believe I just saw an ad a few days ago from the DEQ advertising for a manager for that program. And they are going to get something like 25 new employees over the next 8 years, and do this thing even if it does cost millions of dollars.
But Rocky, in the end, when you talk about taking over the permitting process, they still have to meet federal regulation, at least the minimum federal regulation, right?
That's right. What it does is it gives the state some flexibility, though. EPA tends to be very one solution fits all, whereas Idaho's got a lot more. When their DEQ can do it, for one, they're much more business friendly. Whether you can look at it good or bad, but they are. They're working. The board itself is very business oriented, and so businesses feel comfortable working with the state as opposed to EPA. Things like pollution trading, for instance, the state's going to be really open and supportive of that, and that's a real opportunity. Both to clean up at a lot cheaper price, but also to put some, to help farmers clean up some of their own pollution problems and have the cities pay for it. So it's those kind of innovative ways to do things might be easier to do at the state level.
Jim, you're being unusually quiet.
I only speak if spoken to.
That's not true. That's not true.
You want me to talk then? Some observations.
Or yes or no, one of the two.
Yes or no?
We've gone down that path. Once, now twice, in separate contexts. I just find it interesting to observe that this conservative legislature created yet another layer of government when they created the Wolf Board, and saw no problem with that, though I guess Senator Fulcher did argue against it and made that point. It also reminded me, how many people remember when the 20 cap was put on state agencies, that we could have no more than 20 state agencies? And that was a constitutional amendment that passed when? Was it 1974? I believe it was. It was under the Andrus administration. And rarely has that come up, but it did in this case. In following some of the discussion, and most of it relying upon Betsy's Eye on Boise, and you all read Eye on Boise, don't you? Watching the discussion about the wolves, and we don't even know how many wolves we have in this state, I guess. There's some argument about the sponsor of the legislation said that we needed $2 million so we can maintain the status quo. But we're told that the wolf population is declining by others, I believe biologists in the Department of Fish, is it Fish and Game? Does that sound right? So the governor proposed $2 million because the advisory board that I suspect he appointed recommended $400,000. After all, it's an election year, and this session was defined by election year politics. Ultimately, they came to their senses, I think some of you would agree, and appropriated $400,000. and Maxine Bell delivered one of the memorable quotes of this legislative session: "We have some flexibility when it comes to killing wolves." And they certainly recognized that when they passed the $400,000 appropriation. As to dredge mining, I don't know anything about it, but I do find it interesting that there is this protest that Rocky referred to on July 4th, and that the Idaho County Commissioners, and particularly Jim Schmelik, who is running for Lieutenant Governor, is trying to be very careful about this and avoid a Clive and Bundy confrontation. And they are planning this demonstration, hopefully with the guidance of the BLM. They don't have much use for the EPA, but they think maybe in this case they can have this peaceful confrontation and do it with the cooperation of the BLM. Oh, the EPA and federal agencies. Close your ears, will you? Opinion survey after opinion survey, Idahoans don't like the federal government. And the EPA is a favorite whipping boy. I can remember when moderate, I guess he was a moderate, Dirk Kempthorne, governor, invited, what did he do? Invited EPA to leave the state of Idaho. We've always had problems, I guess, with EPA. Mike Simpson running as a traditional centrist member of Congress today is very proud of the cuts that have been made to EPA. As to dam building, I don't know, Rocky, maybe we will build some dams. We missed that opportunity in the dam building period of the 1950s and 60s. We'll see if there is money available to do that.
Rocky, is there going to be a lot of attention on that protest in July? People who have been dredging small-scale suction dredge mining out in the Salmon River, where they're planning to do this protest, have been doing it kind of under the radar up till this year when the EPA issued a specific permit for this. Do you expect any kind of exchange?
You know, it's hard to say at this point. I will say, most of these guys don't work in the Salmon River. They work in tributaries where you don't see them. If you go up in, I was last year up in the North Fork of the Clearwater, and a guy had a rig in a raft parked right at a bridge, and he just left it there, and he camped, you know, on the weekend. A lot of these things, you'll find them all over. You don't usually find them on the Main, in part because if you're going to do dredge mining on the Main, you have to get a permit from the Idaho Department of Lands. So if these guys are actually going to try to dredge mine in the Salmon River, in that stretch around Riggins, you know, actually they also have to get a permit from the state. So are they going to protest the state too? It'll be interesting to see. And I don't have those answers yet. It's a little bit early. I think I wanted to wait until after this primary to get some of the details, because it is part of the lieutenant governor's campaign. At least it comes up when Jim Schmelik is campaigning. So.
Well, that's his main campaign, isn't it? Is there any other issue?
Well, of course, federal
transfer.
lands.
Yeah, we'll get
Federal
to that
lands
later.
transfer.
Okay.
I thought that was his only issue.
Maybe so.
Well, and speaking of the primary election, what are the major environmental issues that are popping up in some of these legislative and statewide races?
Well, we just started
Right.
talking about federal land transfer, and that has been a really prominent issue in the primary campaign. I think for an entire slate of candidates who are running in particular against top Republican incumbents who are holding office. We mentioned Jim Schmelik. He's actually said that his vision for what he would do as lieutenant governor is essentially to proselytize around the nation for the idea of transferring ownership of federal lands back to states. Travel around and get everybody on board with this idea. It's a different role than what our lieutenant governor has played in the past. But Russ Fulcher, who's running against Butch Otter, also is very hot on this idea, and and is propounding the idea that our economy is suffering in part because we haven't done this. And if we could just tap all those riches that are sitting there waiting for us, we wouldn't have a minimum wage economy. And it's a message that resonates with a certain group in Idaho. The question is in a closed Republican primary with a governor whose position he is not calling for transfer of the lands to the states, but his position isn't all that far off. He's long been a supporter of more state control over management on federal lands and objecting to federal management. Whether that tips the scales and causes people to throw out long-serving, top vote-getting Republican officials.
Jim, we've actually seen people kind of going in all different directions on this lands issue. They issued two memorials, one saying, hey, let's study how the state could feasibly manage federal land as state land, and then the other, they kind of demanded that the federal government hand over that land. How important is getting people onto the same track and working together on something versus kind of now where they're looking at many different options?
A good question, particularly in this primary season. I think Lawrence Wasden, the Attorney General, has characterized this race very well. This is a fight for the heart and soul of the Republican Party. And in this civil war between whatever you want to call them, you can call them the right and the far right, or the traditionalists and the insurgents. There are two world views, and they are parallel universes. I have spent some time now in 2 or 3 debates between the Attorney General and Chris Troupis, his challenger. Wasden maintains that we forever gave up claim to those lands, that that's never going to happen, that rhetoric is great, but you gotta face reality. And he goes on to say, in characterizing this conflict within the Republican Party, and that is between those who are rational and those who are out there on the edge. And we know who he's talking about when he says those out on the edge, his opponent, Troupis. And it's interesting to see them sit side by side and go toe-to-toe on this issue. And Troupis is convinced that we can do it. North Dakota did it. So we can get our lands back. Of course, you might ask, when were they ever our lands to begin with? But Betsy is right. It is something you hear from many of the candidates as they're running as a team, essentially. The insurgent wing not only includes Chris Troupis and Fulcher and Schmelik, but also Einan, who is running for superintendent of public instruction, and Todd Hatfield, who is running for controller. And they consider that this will be some great panacea if indeed these lands are returned to Idaho. Never mind the fact that there has been a Congressional Research Service study that indicated that it would cost Idaho, if we were to manage these lands, $392 million a year, and those numbers might be low. The Idaho Association of Counties is also quoted by Schmelik, because I think he was instrumental in getting them to endorse his resolution, that they are very interested in transfer with this proviso, and I think it's a very important one, that $40 million of payment in lieu of tax monies or monies continue to flow to counties who are significantly dependent on it, particularly some of the rural counties.
So let's assume that Wasden is right, that this is not an actual reality. What are things that the state could do to actually maintain or get more control over some of those lands? I know that there have been proposals as far as setting up some test areas where the state and the federal government work together and the state has more control over what happens on those lands. Is that a reality, and how would that happen?
Well, in the latest Farm Bill, there's some provisions to make larger some good neighbor options that some states are working with the federal government, with the Forest Service, where the state and the Forest Service cooperate across ownership lines. So that, for instance, if you're having a big timber sale on a bunch of state lands in one area, and there's a big chunk of federal land in there, perhaps the state could include the federal land in that sale. Now, it's not that simple, of course, but but that's one of the options. There were also provisions that allowed the governor to go out and actually identify lands where they can do restoration, and with working with collaborative groups, which we happen to have quite a few of around the state, between the timber industry and environmentalists and local communities to do things. But then there's Butch Otter and Raw Labrador's idea that you mentioned, and this really is an old idea, not that old. It's about 25 years old. A gentleman, Randall O'Toole, and a professor, Sally Fairfax, came up with the idea of forest trust, where we would have a trust set up for like a ranger district, and you'd have a board, and their job would be to make sure that all of the various things that you want to get out of that ranger district are gotten, and that the revenues go to the beneficiaries, whoever you decide those are. And so Raw Labrador and Butch's idea is an offshoot of that, except that they've picked the beneficiaries as strictly the counties, and they only talk about cutting timber. They don't talk about all the other things that we expect off of our public lands. You know, I've always thought O'Toole's idea is creative and a good way of using trust law, and we ought to try it, but we've never, you know, politically that's just never gone anywhere. I still think that idea may get some steam out of this whole lands debate that's been going on, not just here, but all across the West. And you know, there are probably some places, but it won't happen in a really controversial area. It'll happen in a place where you don't have quite as much controversy and you have people working together.
One quick comment. I can't get my mind around this. Otter and Labrador working together.
Pretty amazing,
No,
isn't it?
I can't.
Well, that was probably before this week, I guess.
Historical.
Maybe.
Historical reference.
Maybe
Not after
before.
As you might have
endorsement.
heard, Labrador endorsed Russ Fulcher for governor in very strong terms, said that Butch Otter has failed to lead, and pretty much broke with Butch completely. And this is a momentous move in political terms, and will have all kinds of ramifications down the road as far as how those two can or are willing to work together.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit. Let's say that there's some upsets in the upcoming primary elections statewide. You know, let's say we have a Governor Fulcher. How will that change the discussion about environmental issues in Idaho?
Well, I think if Governor Fulcher takes office next January, I think his first challenge and test will be how he handles the sage grouse issue. In 2015, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service is going to issue a decision on whether to list sage grouse as an endangered species. Governor Otter, he isn't probably wanting to advertise this week, but he's been doing, you know, an amazing job of bringing a lot of people together, ranchers and environmentalists, and the utility industry, to put together essentially a state plan for how to manage sage grouse on the federal lands. And that plan was a preferred alternative by the BLM for its plan for this region. And the BLM is going to come out pretty soon with the final. I don't know the outcome, but basically they've been working pretty well. So will Fulcher follow through with that, or would he toss it out and say that we want, you know, we can't trust the BLM and we want a better deal? That's really going to be, that'll be the place we'll see it.
I would think that Governor Fulcher and Lieutenant Governor Schmelik and Attorney General Troupis would devote substantial resources to a legal challenge on the public lands transfer issue and making that a major initiative of their administration, and we would hear a lot about it. I'm not sure that anything would come of it, but we would put substantial resources into that fight.
And they would, I think, want to send a message. that there indeed is a break in policy or significant change with their election, because certainly there are major differences between these two camps.
What about on a congressional level? What if Brian Smith wins in his race against Mike Simpson in Congressional District 2?
Well, I guess maybe we will turn the Idaho National Laboratory into a wilderness area. Maybe it'll become a national monument.
That was a good objective comment.
You know, that was an idea of the Bush administration that Senator Craig went through the roof when he heard about, when the budget OMB proposed it. So that we were going to close it down. And so I don't know. Certainly that is the biggest thing that I think would come out of this is Simpson plays right now the key role in on the Appropriations Committee, since we don't have anybody else on appropriations, in protecting the Idaho National Laboratory's fate. Now they're still getting cuts. We're cutting the federal government, so they're going to continue to get cut. But there won't really be very good of a way for Idaho to fight against those cuts.
Rocky, how might Simpson differ from Smith in the sense that, you know, Simpson has been very outspoken about the Boulder White Clouds, wanting to turn it into a wilderness area? What's the different ideology there?
Well, you know, Smith has been, he really doesn't go very far into the weeds on these issues. He's pretty, to him, even issues like payment in lieu of taxes are small potatoes he doesn't want to get into. He wants the federal government to give the land back to the state, period. And so, like they said, I think he will, but I would suspect he would begin to partner up with Representative Labrador. It would make sense because, you know, Labrador already has laid out some policy initiatives, particularly the one about forest.
Who may or may not have recruited him. We've never quite established the facts there. It is an interesting time in Idaho, I guess in our politics, that the chairman of the subcommittee that can direct funding to a major economic operation in his congressional district, and no other member of our delegation, as Rocky indicated, on the Appropriations Committee, that he could be seriously challenged for re-election. And maybe he won't. You know, Club for Growth has left the state a couple of weeks ago, so maybe this race is over, but certainly there was a lot of national spotlight on this and some question going into it as to how close this race might be, or that Representative Simpson might be defeated as being too good a friend of John Boehner and part of the establishment, and well,
and there's some legislative races that might have implications for environmental issues in Idaho. I'm specifically looking at the Monty Pierce-Abby Lee race, which might be close and has been interesting as far as endorsements and money
Absolutely.
goes. Can you talk a little bit about the implications of that, why that's important for environmental issues?
Well, Monty Pierce, of course, is the Senate Resources Chairman, and he has, his opponent has been endorsed by Governor Otter. Abby Lee has been endorsed by Governor Otter against Monty Pierce. And the governor has endorsed a number of challengers to legislative incumbents, but this is a particularly significant one. And I did talk with the governor about this last weekend. I'm working on a story about some of his endorsements in legislative races, and he said that he made a deal with the leadership, the majority leadership in the House and Senate, that he would not endorse in a primary race where there was an incumbent unless that incumbent had endorsed his opponent. He felt that freed him up to do whatever the heck he wants. And Monty Pierce has endorsed Russ Fulcher and has been very active, but that I don't think was really what pissed the governor off. He talked about his nomination of Joan Hurlock to the Idaho Fish and Game Commission. Remember that? He said the other senators who objected to his appointee had come to him and said, we have this concern or that concern. But Senator Pierce had not. He did not talk to him. Instead, he made a comment that still rankles with Governor Otter, telling Joan Hurlock that she would be a better appointee for the nursing board. She was not a nurse. The governor was offended. he thought that was offensive. And I think that's when he thought Monty Pierce stepped over the line.
Well, it's interesting to watch these mavericks and take actions and to defeat some of the major initiatives of Governor Otter. Transportation funding, that was going to be one of his landmark pieces of legislation, strongly fought by Representative Labrador, but also Monty Pierce and a number of other measures. Maybe there are going to become consequences to votes taken by members of the legislature, not only in this race, but maybe in the race in the Panhandle, where business PACs and groups are pushing back against the Barbieris and the Noninis, who have such a pure right-wing voting record and do not seem to be as concerned about the economic development policies and job priorities that a lot of the local businesses apparently want in the Panhandle.
And
we'll
I
wait
should-
till the returns come in as to who wins this. But
Should mention that Governor Otter has endorsed the primary election challengers to both Senator Nonini and Representative Barbieri.
Well, I think that's true, that votes may come back, and they've already had consequences, and they're not always exactly enlightening. There is a flyer going out from the Idaho Prosperity Fund that in Valley and Boise County to voters in the race there between Lenore Hardy Barrett and Merrill Beeler. And the flyer is chastising Lenore Barrett for being soft on wolves. That's right. I said Lenore Hardy Barrett. This flyer suggests she's not helping us do what we need to do on wolves. That's because Lenore voted twice against HB 140, which was the control board, because she and other House members didn't like the way it was set up. And so the Idaho Prosperity Fund, which I think that's IACI, isn't it? Basically is telling people in Valley and in Boise County, two places that voted for Lenore for the first time last election, probably don't know her the way that folks in Lemhi and Custer County do, where she's, and Jefferson County, where she's long been their representative. So they found a good chance to let those people know that Lenore is, helping those wolves eat your elk.
When I think wolf lover, I think Lenore Hardy Barrett. So and that's about all the time we have, and now it's time to go to questions. So thanks so much.
Any additional questions? Will is collecting, and we'll try to get through as many as we can. So thanks for the presentation panel. We'll go through as many questions as we can get to, and then get people out around 1 o'clock. I know many of you are busy tonight. There's one more debate, isn't there?
one little debate.
We're
It's a
doing
small
the
unknown.
no one's gonna watch it. It's
No
the
interest.
only governor debate with all 4 candidates tonight.
The
We're doing
finale.
it. We're doing it.
8 o'clock,
8
right?
o'clock. Idaho Public Television. Everyone should watch.
I'll be at my Fulcher watch party to.
You're at your watch party. Great. Everyone should go to watch parties.
Okay, first question. Hunters and anglers are a big constituency in Idaho. Have they had an effective voice in the legislative session and in the primary campaign? Any observations why or why not?
Well, hunters have not had a very effective campaign, and it's not just this year. It's pretty much the last time they had an effective impact was when they voted on the bear initiative, and they all came out and stopped that initiative. And by the way, also helped get Helen Chenoweth elected to the House. So it's a real challenge because, for one, the hunter community is kind of fragmented. For instance, the houndmen, want to make sure we've got enough cougars out there so they can hunt them, and there's a whole bunch of other people who think we've got too many cougars eating too many of our deer and elk. And so, there's always these kind of competitive things. This year they tried unsuccessfully to stop a watering down of the already weak laws to try to keep chronic wasting disease out of Idaho's wild populations by regulating the shooter bull operations. And you know, they tried, they threw their best, but they couldn't get enough people. They would have needed to get 500 or 600 people at that hearing, and had they done that, I suspect that would have made a difference, because legislators do listen when hunters do come out, but it's hard to get them all on the same page.
I think that the Idaho Department of Fish and Game has really been reaching out in the last year or two to try to draw people in and talk about its future and what hunters and anglers want from the department, and whether it can do those things with its current funding, and if not, how it should approach the issue of fees. And as a result, the department came to the legislature this year with proposals for what it called a fee lock, where it would lock in fees for those who would purchase a multi-year hunting license or fishing license, and then it would raise fees for those who just come and buy one every few years, and it would encourage more people to buy them more regularly. And they'd figured out, they thought that they could actually cover their future needs with this. Well, Senator Pierce didn't hear it. He didn't want to do that. So half of the bill passed, the part to allow discounts, but not the part to do the fee lock. So I guess that wasn't very effective.
I'd like to use my time to defend Lenore. She voted against the expansion of government, and she's being attacked from the right. That's unfair. And also point out there is a third candidate in this race, so she may still win with a plurality vote like she did last election.
Okay. With this audience today, we have a number of questions regarding federal lands, and so we'll plow through three of them here. First one, if federal lands are given to Idaho, the people pushing for that know they will have much more power and control and do as they please, like privatize and extract, cut down resources to their benefit, basically a short-term economic uptick. What can be done to keep federal lands in federal hands?
I think at this point it's a long shot. I mean, it's either going to end up in the courts or Congress. Congress is not likely to hand over control to the state. I think everyone acknowledges this, and I think even proponents of the federal lands transfer say that if it happens, it's going to be in the court. It's a long shot, quite frankly.
And isn't that what I think it's Jerry Deckard, representing the timber industry, talked about? The solution is not in Boise, it's in Congress.
Right.
It's
right.
worth the congressional legislation.
Right.
Forget about transferring, and then we could talk about the tribes blocking any kind of transfer as well.
Right. Especially, yeah, we haven't even talked about the tribes, and that would be such a legal mess in the court system. So this is not an issue that's going to be resolved anytime soon. Even if Idaho were to sue the federal government tomorrow, it would be a lot of litigation over a long period of time.
I could see settlement talks where the tribes say, okay, you give us all the national forest that's in our ceded lands, or all the BLM land that was in our ceded lands, and you can have the rest. You know, that's, the fact is, it's not going to win in court, and they kind of signal it in different ways. The whole court case is based around the idea that the states would get the land and then they would sell it, then they would be required under this to at some point sell it all off, and then to give all but like 20%, I can't remember, maybe it's less, 5% to the federal government to pay off the federal debt. And Mr. Smolik is saying, in fact, that's his selling point to the rest of the country, is we can use that money, we'll pay off our share of the federal debt, but then we'll get to keep those lands. That's what we want to do. And I mean, it doesn't make sense. I mean, they want to pick and choose, you know, because they know that Idahoans love their public lands. They do not want to sell off the public lands. They've made that clear. You know, so it's really and as Butch found out a few years ago, when Butch actually proposed selling off public lands, he almost lost the election to Jerry Brady based on that idea. And I know almost is probably a little strong, but certainly had he not backed off from his proposal to sell off public lands to pay the people in Katrina, I think we would be dealing with, how did Governor Brady handle all these issues the last?
Remember, that was a pretty close election.
So that's, I don't think Republicans are a majority for doing this, and certainly not if they thought that we would be selling off these lands.
Well, and the public likes the public lands, and there was a survey, I think it was an ICL commission survey done by Bob Moore a year or two ago, indicating that over 70% of Idahoans supported enforcement of federal regulations on federal lands. So it could be these politicians are out of step with the public. We'll see.
Well, Rocky, we actually had talked to the lieutenant governor candidates, the GOP side, last week, and asked them the question, what kind of time frame are we looking at? And I think even they said, you know, it's at least a decade down the road, if not much, much further, hopefully maybe in our lifetime.
That's exactly it. Smelik made it clear. He doesn't think this is going to happen overnight. This is a movement to these folks, and it's something they see us moving toward, because, you know, from their standpoint, you know, our federal debt's bad, and unless we deal with this federal debt, you know, we're going to go to hell in a handbasket. So the only way, you know, the one thing that we have at our disposal is all this federal land, and if we could just steer this federal land to paying off this debt, they believe that could make a substantial dent.
Got a question that bores in more specifically on this land trust idea. Regarding land trust, how would NEPA fit? Virtually every logging project proposed on federal lands ends up in court. How would that change in a trust?
Well, what O'Toole suggested was that we would pass a law that would give this trust board some special NEPA treatment. And, you know, that, of course, is the kind of thing that, you know, you'd have to deal with. So, you know, it would, you know, it doesn't mean there wouldn't be NEPA review. It would be, quote, special NEPA treatment, whatever that means. And, you know, we've done things like that. There are certainly things, you know, we do have that, but it's, you know, NEPA is this big giant law that, you know, that started out in a different way. It's become so, if you're a manager in here, you know what I'm talking about, is, you know, you aren't just passing the law, you're passing every legal decision that has happened since that law. And so it is a, you know, so we've gone from the 19-page Teton Dam EIS, and you saw where that got us, and up to, you know, gosh, thousands and thousands of pages today. So, you know, I don't know. I think that, I personally think that they could put that together, but there's that word trust, we don't understand that word very well. and that's before anybody even seriously talks about doing trust, using the trust laws to do that. We're going to have to have made a great leap of faith.
Okay, the final point on this federal lands question, and this is more of a comment, and maybe it represents a way forward. One of the folks here in the audience points out the state of Idaho already manages the parks and trails at Cascade and Walcott reservoirs, which are federal reservoirs. Bonneville County has management around Ryrie Reservoir. There are laws on the books to allow state and federal partnerships. Does that represent a way forward on this issue?
I think it's a way forward on a lot of different issues, but will it satisfy the political issue? I don't think so. But I do think, I mean, I think there are great potential. People are talking about a national monument in the Boulder White Clouds. People there are talking about, gee, maybe we could have a visitor center for this new monument at the state mining center in Chalice. Another proposal for, we've already done that in, like you say, City of Rocks. We've got all kinds of examples of doing these, and I think that actually makes a lot of sense. But we, politically, it's still tough.
And Russ Fulcher told me that although he wants, his goal is the transfer of the federal lands, in the meantime, he'd take collaborative projects, he'd take stewardship projects, he'd take experiments in state management of federal lands, that he's open to all ideas.
Okay. Let's shift gears here and talk a little bit about Idaho Reports. Without revealing too many trade secrets, do you want to take a little bit of time and just briefly describe how your panel prepares for your weekly panel that you do at the end of each episode?
Sure.
Did you say prepare?
Prepare?
Well, I usually, during legislative session, I prepare for the panel by simply covering the legislature all week and then coming to the taping.
And then we tell her what we wanted to talk about. So it's a little bit different during the legislative session because we don't want to plan too far in advance because things change so quickly during the legislative session. So we could plan to talk about something, on Tuesday and say we know we definitely want to talk about this, and by Friday afternoon when we're taping, the bill's already been killed or tabled or something like that. Producer Seth Ogilvy and Jim Weatherby and I and sometimes Aaron meet for coffee twice a week. And we kind of go over the issues. We talk to Betsy about what she's interested in. We pick a reporter who's been covering what we want to talk about. And then we meet beforehand and we kind of set the roadmap. And our goal with the pundit panel is to kind of do analysis. We don't want it to be just, reading an Associated Press story and telling you what you already know. But we actually want to give some analysis and take the conversation to a different place. And that's one of the benefits we have as a weekly news show as opposed to just the nightly half-hour shows. They do a great job of giving you the updates that you need to know what's going on a daily basis. But we have the luxury of having a 7-minute discussion about the ag-gag bill or guns on campus if we want, and that's part of the fun of it. And so right before we do the pundit panel, we kind of set a roadmap, but sometimes we change the questions as we go based on what our panelists are saying. So that's kind of the behind the scenes at Idaho Reports.
Or how much time we have left.
Or how much time we have left.
There's a lot of times where we haven't gotten through even half our questions and we're getting the wrap up, so then we kind of...
Yeah. And that's when I get the yes or no question.
Yeah, yes or no, Jim.
But we are very lucky to have folks like Jim Weatherby and Betsy Russell who have so much institutional memory that they can dig deep and remember things that happened a few years back.
Right.
Like the 1974 constitutional amendment.
Yeah.
Exactly, yes.
Was it 20 or something? Yes.
That's where you see Seth and Melissa and I sitting back going, wow.
I just
what he said.
Yeah, I thought about that, and I don't remember that being talked about in the playground at Sacred Heart School.
No.
Just one quick follow-up. I first of all read the official record of the legislature. I download that. I am Boise. I read and I'm not kidding. I read everything I possibly can, and then I have certain people I call.
Yeah,
and then, hopefully, I'm on point with what we're going to discuss.
Hopefully.
After all the planning, and then things can shift right at the last minute, and you're there and you're ready to say something, and the thought comes across, that panic strikes when you realize that whatever you say is being recorded, is going to be archived, and is on Idaho Reports' website from here till...
At least a couple years from now.
Sometimes things change right up until we go on and tape. I mean, there was that Guns on Campus hearing that went until 4:15 on a Friday afternoon, and we usually tape by like 2:30 or 3. And so as soon as they voted, we ran on set and we were writing down quotes like, what did this person say? What did Bruce Newcomb say? That kind of thing. And so usually we're not that rushed. But.
Okay.
Unless you're Betsy, then you're writing as we're getting ready, and then you're running out right after you get done taping.
Kind of a busy time of year.
Everything that you said will stay on the Idaho Reports website, and then if it ever goes away from there, having watched Frontline last night, I guess the NSA will have a copy of it.
Exactly.
A couple more questions and then we'll wrap up. This is a sort of a reflective one, just a simple question. Is there any hope of a voice for conservation in Idaho? Who wants to take a swing at that one?
I believe there's an organization whose motto is a voice for conservation in Idaho, isn't there? Isn't that the conservation voters?
There's conservation voters
Yeah.
for Idaho, yeah. Is there any hope of a voice?
Rocky?
Well, you know, I think it's ridiculous. I think conservation in Idaho is so mainstream. You know, there are people in both parties. I mean, it's just the way we talk about it, and it's so much different today than we talk about it than when I first came here back in 1985. And when I guess you were still a young man. No, but you know, environmentalist is no longer a dirty word in the state. Conservation certainly is something that now both sides embrace, and rightfully so. I noticed, for instance, that they're going to be giving the Tobias Award to Wendy Wilson and Steve Stubner this year. Now, Steve does most of his work nowadays for the Idaho Rangeland Commission, and you know, which represents ranchers. And Wendy is the executive director of Advocates for the West, which represents a group of lawyers that sometimes is on the other side with ranchers. So it just tells you that how far we've come in this state. I'm excited about it. I still get, we laugh about how these things are, you know, get so sharp. I had my column this week about somebody who wanted us to go back and open the mine at the molybdenum mine at Castle Peak. Well, you know what? We're not going to do that. And, you know, the world's changed. I'm pretty positive.
Thanks. So for the last question here, I thought it'd be kind of fun to do a little political forecasting. Between Simpson and Otter next week, which of the two of them will get a higher percentage of the vote? Will it be Simpson in his primary race in the 2nd district, or the governor in his primary race for re-election as governor?
I'm going to say Simpson.
I'm going to say Simpson. Simpson gets a higher percentage than Otter does.
I want you to know I'm not good at this predicting business. I annually predict the Chicago Cubs will be in the World Series. That hasn't happened yet. Well, given the fact that Governor Otter got 55% of the vote running against Rex Rammel and what's her name, the county commissioner in Ada
Sharon
County?
Ullman.
Sharon Ullman. Yeah, I'll say Simpson.
I'm gonna have to say Simpson as well.
Is that it?
I go along.
He's just along for the ride.
I'm a terrible predictor.
4 and 1 abstention
Come on,
for
stand
Simpson.
up, Rocky.
Yeah, I
Okay,
think
well-
Shirley Ringo's got a pretty good chance of winning her race. So how's that?
In the primary.
That's right, and
The
Labrador
primary.
against 4 opponents will be.
Right.
Yes,
you know.
I think it'll be her and Labrador in the fall.
Labrador is safe in the primary.
Thank you all for joining on this panel today. We know that you have a big debate tonight that many of you are involved in, and let's give it up for the panel. Watch your email inbox. We'll be announcing the next program for IEF. Until now, we're adjourned.
I started my water thing wanting to talk about the cigarette tax. That was significant.